to do is listen and talk to people, which are the two things that, unfortunately, I think we haven't done as a collective within our country. Talking about issues, expressing ourselves, expressing our feelings, having a mediator. You know, you all do marriage counseling, I'm sure, as well. And the need for people to be able to talk about these issues is ever present, but there aren't really any outlets. And I think that being able to talk to a therapist about it, some people might say, well, why would I talk to a therapist about what's happening in the media? But I know that the APA has put out a press release recently about resiliency and resources for people if they are fed up and overwhelmed and traumatized, whether they're African American or not, by what they see on television. I think the challenge, though, is for the people who aren't living it every day, they can turn the TV off. Right? They can stop engaging in social media. But for African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans are also another community that are impacted by police brutality. You can't just turn the TV off. You can't just, stop engaging in social media. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what are some other things that we can do to build resiliency or to help people during this time where they feel stressed and traumatized.
Well, taking the time to understand any culture is important, right? So if someone comes to see me based on their race, their culture, their country of origin, family of origin, there's so much to learn about them, and there's so many subtleties. Like, we can't just put everybody in a bag, this bag or that bag. And those subtleties are really what kind of determines people's relationships, both with themselves and with the outside world. And within each culture, there's different dynamics in terms of what feelings are acceptable to have, what feelings are acceptable to show, right? Your relationship with yourself, how you relate to the outside world, to the community, even to other individuals in your community. And that's all culturally dictated in so many ways, right? So in our culture, we know anger is what people show, right? It's the easiest. But our job is usually to figure out what is that feeling behind it that fuels the anger. Are you mad or sad or nervous? What's going on? Because we can all show the anger so easily, right? And in the shootings and the things we see now, because of all this pressure and the tension, it's like the weak theme, that person who, at least in my thinking, who's like struggles the most in their psychological, psychiatric life. Those are the weak themes. Those are the people who show these big angers, who act out, who do the shooting. So we understand where the pressure comes from, but they don't have the ego strength to manage it like we do. We just keep going to work, and that's not a great solution either. But they're the weak themes, and it will come out with people like that. And they always talk about their psychiatric history and everything, but that's why that happens. Right, and we're all feeling this building pressure, and somewhere it leaks out. There's no such thing as avoiding or denying it. It's like feeling bad and saying, "Well, I'm not going to deal with that anymore." Yeah. It doesn't go away. It never goes away. It leaks out somewhere, and that's what we're seeing all the time. And I work with a lot of police officers, and their ability to manage emotions, manage their traumas, manage their pressures, sometimes is not that good, and they struggle too, right? So
they're people.
We're only human.
Right. We are only human, and they're put in jobs where they are forced to deal with difficult situations every day. It's like being in the military, right?
But I do wonder, is there a need? We know that there's a need for police reform and how to de-escalate situations, but I've noticed some parallels in regards to shootings of especially unarmed African American men and women, that sometimes the person who has been shot is dealing with depression or has some sort of mental illness or might be schizophrenic. There's oftentimes, that's what's come up in the media, that they've been called to a scene because there was, someone having, they were off their meds or what have you. And so I wonder, are police, and I don't know if you can answer this, are police often trained to deal with people with mental illness issues? Because I feel like the Black Lives Matter and sort of the mental health community, there's some synergy there in regards to, one, training police on how to interact with people of different ethnicities and deal with different communities. And then there's also a need for training, it seems like. For example, the man who was protecting a patient who had mental illness, who was shot, protecting his patient. And so, you know, do you feel like there might be a need, or do you think there's a need there within police training on mental health issues and how to recognize it?
There's a constant need there. It's constant. It's always ongoing. There have been a lot of efforts to make mental health more of a priority and making more people aware about what it is like to interact with individuals who may have a history of mental illness or have a mental health issue. But it's constant, it's ongoing. The more training, the better. And it's those little nuances that was mentioned earlier that need to be brought out and made, people need to be aware of them. One way to counter that, you mentioned ways to counter this pressure or stress that people are dealing with, is to have those outlets to reconnect, you know, with others in your community. Being in tune with yourself. Before we had a little conversation about being mindful, being aware of the moment, being present, being grounded and centered. And again, just connecting with your community, be it church, be it, you know, friends at work, you know, connecting with school buddies, you know, having those outlets, going to the movies for yourself. Having those outlets are important and key for your own mental health, for the community's mental health. It starts with you, and it's like a ripple effect.
Yeah, we talked about de-escalation and empathy training for policemen, you know. There are some departments that try to do that, right?
Exactly.
They do that training and they're actively doing it. You know, right after the shootings, they had talked about, you know, maybe there's a handful in the country that are doing that, and trying to find out how to de-escalate situations and develop empathy, you know, in a very difficult job. You know, you're in a threatening position, and to be empathic at the same time. That's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Right? But to at least have that, like I fall back to my tool idea, at least have that as an option to bring into those situations, to not just go in force on force. That's how you de-escalate those situations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be firm in a certain way, but you also have to have that, like that third ear listening to like what else might be going on here. How big a risk really is this?
Sure. And I think, you know, I often point out, just because laws change, you can't change the hearts of men, you know, or people, right? You can't change people's hearts. And so even if people do get the empathy training, it sounds like, both to your points, people have their own set of circumstances and experiences they're going to bring into a situation.
Right.
And no matter how much training they have, whether they're a healthcare professional, psychologist, if they've got a bias or a prejudice, unfortunately they might exercise it.
And empathy is the hardest thing to teach.
Right.
If you don't have it,
You
it is
don't.
the hardest thing on the planet to teach someone how to do. You can teach almost anything.
Right.
Empathy is super difficult. If you have a certain personalities that have no empathy, or certain people who develop a little empathy, it's so difficult because it's not a tangible thing. They have to be able to connect to another person and not just care about what they feel, but try to connect to what they feel.
And try to understand.